Tonight, we open a door the Vatican prayed would stay sealed forever. A secret woven into the oldest pages of Scripture, whispered in forbidden texts, and buried beneath a silence so deliberate it stretches across centuries. It is the story of beings neither fully human nor fully divine. Titans born from the union of heaven and earth, the Nephilim. Their existence was not just questioned, it was erased. Locked away in vaults deeper than catacombs, guarded by archivists who never speak, and hidden behind doctrines crafted to keep you from asking the one question that could unravel everything we think we know. What if they were real? What if they shaped empires? What if their blood still moves quietly through the world today? The deeper you go, the stranger the truth becomes. Skeletons that never made it to museums, saints described with impossible strength, cathedrals built with doors far too large for ordinary men, and ancient books cast out as heresy because they revealed too much. But tonight, we are following the trail the Church never wanted anyone to walk. So before we push further into this mystery, before we open the vaults and confront the shadows that survived the flood, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. You are about to learn the forbidden truth the Vatican fears about the Nephilim. In every ancient story there is a moment where the world feels different, where history trembles, where something impossible steps into the realm of the real. Imagine a time long before kingdoms rose and fell, long before the world was divided by borders or beliefs, when the earth was young and the sky seemed closer than it does today. This is where the story of the Nephilim begins, in a world where giants walked beside humans, and the line between heaven and earth was thin enough for footsteps to cross it. The strange thing is that this story is not hidden in some rare lost scripture. It sits right in the opening pages of the Bible, in the 6th chapter of Genesis. A chapter that most people never notice, even though it holds one of the most unsettling secrets in all of religious history. It describes a moment when the sons of God looked upon the daughters of men and took them as wives. And from this union came beings unlike anything the world had ever seen. The Nephilim, giants, titans, hybrids of heaven and earth. Creatures too powerful to be ignored, yet too dangerous to be remembered openly. That one small verse has troubled scholars for thousands of years because it does not belong to the simple world we are taught to imagine. It hints at a time when supernatural beings walked freely among humans, and that one idea threatens to rewrite everything we believe about the ancient world. If this story is true, then early humanity was not alone. It shared the earth with beings far stronger and far more intelligent than ordinary men. But there is something even stranger. The churches that built their foundations on the Bible rarely speak about this passage. They read past it quickly, they turn the page, they move on. Why? Why does this story make them uncomfortable? Why does a single sentence describing giants feel like a threat to the foundations of faith? The deeper you look, the more you sense something unsettling. Throughout the ancient world, there are stories of powerful beings who came from the sky and taught early humans secrets they were never meant to know. Ancient Sumerian tablets speak of gods descending to mingle with mortals. Greek legends tell of divine beings having children with humans. Even cultures separated by oceans share memories of a forgotten age when giants shaped mountains and fought epic battles. And yet the Bible offers the earliest written account of all. It does not deny these beings, it names them, the Nephilim, and then it moves on as if hoping no one will ask the obvious question, who were they really? The mystery grows deeper when you consider what happened next. According to the story, the presence of these hybrids led to violence and chaos across the earth, and soon after, the Great Flood wiped out almost all life. Many have wondered if the flood was not simply punishment for sin, but a cleansing of a genetic corruption far beyond anything we can imagine. A reset of humanity, a reset of history. Even today, scholars argue over the meaning of the word Nephilim. Some say it means fallen ones, others say it means giants. But everyone agrees on one thing. It points to something ancient and powerful that no one fully understands. And if this story is not just myth, then the world we think we know may only be a dim shadow of the world that once existed. The question is not whether giants walked the earth. The question is whether the truth about them has been hidden in plain sight all along. There is a single verse in the Bible that feels like it does not belong. It appears early on, tucked quietly into the 6th chapter of Genesis, just before the story of Noah and the Great Flood. You could miss it if you blink, but if you read it closely, it changes everything. Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown." Just like that, the Bible tells us that giants once walked the earth. But the story ends there. No names, no locations, no details. Just one strange sentence, then silence. And in churches around the world, that verse is almost never spoken out loud. Preachers skip past it, Bible study guides glance over it. Most people grow up never hearing it at all. But why? Why would a verse that appears so early in the Bible be treated like a mistake? The answer may be more disturbing than the verse itself. Genesis 6 verse 4 does not just mention giants. It suggests that they were born from a union between heavenly beings and human women, sons of God and daughters of men. The language is ancient, but the meaning is clear. Something otherworldly came down and changed humanity forever. And if that is true, then we are not the only intelligent beings who have shaped history. This idea has made religious institutions deeply uncomfortable for centuries. Because if angels or divine beings had the ability to reproduce with humans, it challenges everything we are taught about the order of creation. It blurs the line between heaven and earth, between the sacred and the forbidden, and the Church, for all its power, has always needed clear lines, good and evil, heaven and hell, angels and demons. But the Nephilim are something else, something in between, something the Bible names but never explains. That is why this verse feels dangerous. It opens a door to questions no one in power wants you to ask. Who were the sons of God? Why did they come here? And if their children were giants, how many of them once lived among us? Some early church fathers did talk about this verse. Theologians like Justin Martyr and Irenaeus believed that the sons of God were in fact angels, and that their rebellion brought corruption to earth. But as the church grew more powerful and more organized, these stories were quietly pushed aside. The Book of Enoch, which explains the whole tale in vivid detail, was removed from the Bible in most traditions. Genesis 6 verse 4 remained, but without context, like a warning stripped of its meaning. And so it sits in the Bible like a secret no one is allowed to explore, a riddle hiding in plain sight. And every time a preacher skips over it, every time a Bible study ignores it, that silence grows louder. Because silence is not just the absence of speech, it is sometimes the clearest sign of fear. If the church has spent centuries avoiding one sentence, perhaps that sentence holds a truth more powerful than anyone dares to admit, not because it is false, but because it might be true. There is a book older than most of the Bible, a book that once held a place of honor among early Christian writings. But today you will not find it in most churches. It is called the Book of Enoch, and for centuries it was hidden, forgotten, or outright banned. Not because it was false, but because it told too much of the truth. While Genesis gives us only one mysterious sentence about the Nephilim, the Book of Enoch gives us the full story. It names the angels. It explains the rebellion. It describes how they descended to earth and changed everything. These angels were called the Watchers, 200 of them. They were supposed to observe, to guide, but instead they broke the divine laws. They looked upon human women and chose to take them as wives. The children they fathered were not ordinary. They were giants, beings of massive size and strange power, the Nephilim. But the Book of Enoch does not stop there. It reveals something far more dangerous. It says the Watchers also gave forbidden knowledge to humans, secrets of the stars, the movement of the moon, the making of weapons, the use of herbs, the power of magic. They gave humans tools that were meant only for the heavens, and with that knowledge came chaos, war, bloodshed, corruption. The earth groaned under the weight of these giants. Humanity, once innocent, became filled with violence. And so, the Book of Enoch says, the flood was sent not just to cleanse sin, but to wipe away the bloodline of the Nephilim, a hard reset on a world spinning out of control. This was not just a story, it was a warning. And that is exactly why the church could not allow it to spread. For early Christians, the Book of Enoch was widely read. The Apostle Jude even quotes it directly in the New Testament. It was part of the spiritual conversation for centuries. But as the church began to organize its power, it needed a cleaner story. One God, one devil, one version of events. And the Book of Enoch complicated everything. It made angels look flawed. It made heaven look divided. It made ancient history look like something far more advanced and dangerous than what official doctrine allowed. So they removed it. They called it apocryphal. They banned it from public reading. They locked it away. For nearly 1,000 years, the Book of Enoch vanished from the West. It was preserved only in Ethiopia, where it remained a sacred text. When European scholars rediscovered it in the 19th century, they were stunned. This book had predicted the coming of a chosen one. It described a heavenly court. It contained prophecies that matched parts of Revelation, and yet no one had heard of it, because it had been erased, not by fire, but by silence. The question is not why the Book of Enoch was excluded. The question is what the church feared it would awaken. If humans once walked beside giants, if angels once taught forbidden wisdom, then our history is not just broken, it has been buried. And the Book of Enoch may be the only voice left speaking from beneath the dirt. Before the flood, before the rise of kings and empires, there was another kind of fall, not of men, but of angels, the Watchers. That was their name. 200 heavenly beings sent to observe the earth. They were not demons. They were not cast down. They came willingly. Their mission was simple: watch, guide, never interfere. But something changed. As they gazed upon the world, they saw the beauty of human life, the wonder of creation, and something happened that even heaven could not predict. They grew curious. Then they grew tempted. And finally, they made a choice that would shake the universe. According to the Book of Enoch, the Watchers descended to earth at a place called Mount Hermon. There, they made a pact. Each one swore an oath that if one of them broke the divine boundary, they would all stand together. Bound by their own word, they crossed the line. They took human wives. They fathered children. These children were not ordinary, they were giants, the Nephilim. But the Watchers did more than just break heavenly law. They gave humans secrets, forbidden knowledge, things that were not meant to be known. One taught the cutting of roots and the use of herbs. Another revealed the paths of the stars and the secrets of the moon. One showed how to forge weapons from iron and shape metal into tools of war. Another taught the art of enchantment and how to use charms and spells. These were not just gifts, they were weapons, tools of transformation, knowledge that could lift a people or destroy a world. And that is exactly what happened. As the Nephilim grew, they consumed everything. They devoured the earth's food. They hunted animals into extinction. Then they turned on mankind. The world fell into violence, and the balance of creation broke. But who were the Watchers really? Some say they were angels assigned to Earth to protect it. Others believe they were part of a higher plan that was never meant to be revealed. But one thing is clear, their fall was not like Lucifer's. It was not born out of pride or rebellion. It was born out of fascination, curiosity, love even. And that may be what makes them even more dangerous. Because they did not come to destroy, they came to share. And what they shared changed everything. The Book of Enoch names them. Semyaza, their leader. Azazel, the one who taught warfare. Armoros, who taught spells. These names are ancient echoes, forgotten by time, erased from sermons, and yet they remain like cracks in the foundation of our history. The Watchers were punished. According to the story, God sent the archangel Raphael to bind them beneath the earth until the day of judgment. Their children, the Nephilim, were swept away in the flood, but some believe their influence never fully disappeared, that the knowledge they gave still lingers, in symbols, in rituals, in secret texts hidden in stone vaults. If the Watchers came once, who is to say they will not come again? And if they do, will anyone remember the warning they left behind? Or will the world once again mistake their gifts for miracles and pay the price for a knowledge we were never meant to hold? In every ancient civilization, there are sudden explosions of knowledge that seem to come from nowhere. The ability to track stars with perfect accuracy, the power to build monuments aligned with celestial bodies, complex metal tools, strange symbols carved in stone that seem to speak a language older than any empire. Where did all of this come from? How did early humans, with no schools, no machines, no writing, gain access to such advanced understanding of the world? The answer, according to one of the oldest banned texts in history, is that they were taught by beings not of this earth, the Watchers. The Book of Enoch describes a moment when these 200 angels descended from the heavens and gave forbidden gifts to humanity, not just spiritual lessons, but actual skills. They taught people how to chart the stars, how to understand the phases of the moon, how to read the movements of the planets. This knowledge was not meant for mankind, but the Watchers gave it freely, and it did not stop there. One of them, named Azazel, taught humans how to forge metal from the earth. He showed them how to make swords, knives, shields, and breastplates. He revealed the secrets of war. Another taught the art of enchantment. Others revealed how to use roots and herbs to alter the mind and body. One taught how to make mirrors, how to shape makeup from stones and dust. Not because beauty mattered, but because it could be used to manipulate, to distract, to seduce. It was all knowledge, but it came too fast, and it came without wisdom. Many ancient cultures speak of a time when the gods walked among them and handed down sacred tools. In Egypt, the god Thoth was said to bring writing and astronomy. In Mesopotamia, the Apkallu were beings sent by the gods to give humans civilization. In India, the Vedas speak of powerful beings who flew in machines and wielded deadly weapons. What if these were all different memories of the same event? The same visitors, the same Watchers? Modern historians call it myth. But some researchers believe these stories point to a real historical moment, a time when someone or something accelerated the growth of human knowledge. But it came at a cost. The Book of Enoch says, The earth cried out under the weight of what followed. The Nephilim became violent. Humanity turned against itself. The balance of creation broke, and so the flood came. Not to destroy sin, but to erase what had been unleashed. The watchers were bound, their children were wiped out, but the knowledge they gave did not vanish. It lingered, hidden in ancient texts, passed down in symbols, preserved in secret. Some say it became the foundation of secret societies. Others believe it still sleeps in forgotten ruins, waiting to be found again. The Vatican knows this story. The Book of Enoch was once part of their libraries. They chose to remove it, not because it was untrue, but because it pointed to a world too complex, too strange, too dangerous. A world where angels gave mankind the power of gods, and where that power nearly destroyed us all. The flood was supposed to be the end, a divine reset, a washing away of all corruption. The Nephilim, those strange giants born of angels and humans, were said to have been wiped out completely, their cities drowned, their bones buried beneath layers of mud and silence. But something about that story feels unfinished, because after the flood, giants appear again. In the pages of ancient texts, in the memories of civilizations, in the bloodlines of kings, the Bible itself hints at this mystery. In the Book of Numbers, centuries after the flood, spies are sent into the land of Canaan. What they report is chilling. They say they saw giants, descendants of the Nephilim. They describe themselves as grasshoppers in comparison, terrified, outmatched. So how could they still exist if the flood had erased them? Some scholars suggest that not all the blood was destroyed. Maybe one of the wives on Noah's Ark carried the Nephilim lineage. Maybe the flood did not cover the entire earth as we think of it today. Maybe some of the hybrid bloodlines hid in high mountains or deep underground cities. Whatever the case, the ancient world after the flood is still haunted by echoes of giants. And not just in myth. Look closely at the royal bloodlines of history. In Egypt, the earliest pharaohs were said to be part divine, descended from gods who came from the stars. They were often portrayed with massive bodies, elongated skulls, and supernatural knowledge. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerian king list records rulers who lived for hundreds of years. One king was said to have ruled for over 20,000 years. And in the Bible, Goliath was not the only giant. There are others. Og, the king of Bashan, ruled over a land of giants. His bed was described as massive, made of iron, nearly 13 feet in length. What if these rulers were not just tall men with legends wrapped around them? What if they were the descendants of something older? Something that survived the flood, not just in body, but in blood. Over time, the idea of divine right became popular among kings. The belief that their authority came from the heavens. But what if that was not just a metaphor? What if some rulers knew they were different, that they carried within them a spark of something ancient, something powerful, that their bloodline was not purely human? Even in medieval Europe, noble families were obsessed with lineage. Royal marriages were arranged not for love but for blood purity. Tracing ancestry was more than tradition, it was control. A way to protect whatever secret power that bloodline carried. Some say that is why certain families seemed untouchable, above the law, above the church, because they were descendants of a forgotten race. The hybrids, who once ruled by size and strength, now ruled by wealth and influence. The Vatican, with its vast archives and ancient texts, likely knows more than it tells. If the Nephilim bloodline shaped empires, then history itself has been guided by something not entirely human. And perhaps the greatest secret is not that giants once walked the earth, but that their descendants never stopped walking. They only learned how to hide. There is a place beneath the streets of Vatican City where sunlight has never touched, a place older than the Renaissance and more guarded than any treasure vault on earth. It is known as the Vatican Secret Archive. But despite the name, it is not fiction. It is very real. And according to whispers from scholars, ex-priests, and a few who have walked its cold stone corridors, it may hold the greatest secrets of human history. Among them, the truth about giants. The official story says the archive contains papal letters, church records, and ancient religious texts. But those who have seen more say there are chambers sealed behind iron doors, vaults that hold things never meant to be found, massive bones that do not match the human skeleton, maps that show continents before they were discovered, scrolls written in languages no one has spoken in over 1,000 years, and most mysterious of all, detailed accounts of the Nephilim. Some of these records are said to come from early missionaries who travelled to distant lands and returned with stories of massive skeletons found in burial mounds. Others describe cathedrals being built on sites where giant bones were unearthed, only to be removed in the night by cloaked figures. There are even rumours of letters between popes and monarchs discussing how to manage such discoveries without causing public panic. These letters were never published, but they are said to be preserved in the vaults, carefully catalogued, never seen. During the early 20th century, there were reports of giant skeletons found in Italy, Turkey, and parts of North Africa. Some measured over 9 feet tall. Local papers covered the stories for a day or two, then they vanished. The bones were quietly taken away, not to museums, but to the Vatican. This pattern repeats again and again. A discovery is made. A few photos leak, then silence. The site is closed, the artifacts disappear, and the story fades like smoke. Why would the Vatican hide this? The answer might lie in what giants represent. The Nephilim are not just physical anomalies. They are a direct link to a forbidden time. A time when angels walked the earth, when knowledge came from the sky, when humanity was not alone. If that story is true, then the entire foundation of religious history would have to be rewritten. And the Vatican, more than any other institution, has the most to lose. The Book of Enoch, the references in Genesis, the scattered mentions of giants in ancient texts from around the world, all of it forms a pattern that points to something the Church once knew but chose to bury, not destroy, preserve, but never share. That is the most chilling part. These records may still exist, perfectly preserved, locked away just beneath the feet of pilgrims and tourists who walk the halls of the Vatican every day. They will never see them, because the truth, when it threatens power, is not denied, it is hidden, quietly, completely, and for as long as no one asks the right questions, it stays buried in the dark. Everyone knows the story of Noah's Ark, a righteous man warned by God to build a great vessel, a flood sent to wash away a world drowned in sin. Animals marched 2 by 2. Rain fell for 40 days and nights. And when the water finally receded, a new beginning emerged. It is a story told to children, painted on church walls, and remembered as a lesson in obedience and faith. But what if the story we were taught was only half the truth? What if the flood was not just about punishing sin? What if it was something far more precise? A reset, not of morals, but of genetics. In Genesis chapter 6, just before the flood begins, there is a strange shift in the story. It says the sons of God came down and had children with the daughters of men. Their offspring were the Nephilim, giants, beings of great strength and mystery. And then suddenly, God sees that the earth is filled with violence and corruption. He decides to destroy all life. But the timing is important. The flood does not come before the Nephilim. It comes because of them. The Book of Enoch explains this in even more detail. It says the Watchers, fallen angels, gave forbidden knowledge to humans. Their children, the Nephilim, became monstrous. They devoured everything. They turned on mankind. They polluted the earth not just with violence, but with a corrupted bloodline. Humanity was no longer fully human. Something else had mixed with it, something unnatural. So the flood becomes something different, not just a punishment, a cleansing, a targeted erasure of a genetic experiment gone wrong, a way to wipe the slate clean and restart the human story. In that light, Noah's Ark takes on new meaning. According to the Bible, Noah was chosen not only because he was righteous, but because he was perfect in his generations. That phrase, often ignored, could mean something more. It could mean his bloodline was untainted, free from the corruption of the Nephilim. If so, the Ark was not just about saving species. It was about preserving a pure genetic code. This idea is not limited to the Bible. Cultures around the world tell stories of a great flood sent by the gods. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh describes a massive deluge that destroys a world of chaos. In Hindu texts, Manu is warned of a flood and told to build a boat. In ancient Mesoamerica, the gods send water to end an age of giants. Different names, different lands, same story. A world corrupted, a flood that resets it. But if the Nephilim were the reason, why did no one speak of it openly? Why was the story cleaned up into a tale of simple sin? Perhaps because the idea of hybrid beings challenges too much. It questions the nature of humanity. It reveals a past far stranger than most are ready to believe. And it hints that those ancient days were not filled with myth, but memory. The Vatican knows these stories. The Book of Enoch was removed from public view for a reason, because it connects the flood to something the Church cannot explain. Not just a God of mercy, but a God who made a decision to erase part of his own creation, not to punish, but to purify. And in that act lies a truth most are still not ready to face. That we are not the first version of mankind, just the latest one that was allowed to remain. In the quiet corners of history, buried beneath layers of time and dust, there are stories that never made it into textbooks. Between the late 19th and early 20th centuries, strange discoveries began to surface across Europe and the Americas. Farmers, explorers, and archaeologists unearthed bones, not just old bones, giant ones. Skeletons far larger than any known human. Skulls with strange shapes, jawbones that could fit over a normal man's face, femurs the size of fence posts, and just as quickly as they appeared, they vanished. Newspapers at the time did not ignore these finds. Headlines from small towns reported the shocking discoveries. In Pennsylvania, a skeleton nearly 8 feet tall was found in a burial mound. In Wisconsin, diggers uncovered multiple giants buried together. In Nevada, miners stumbled upon what they claimed were mummified remains of red-haired giants hidden in a cave. The reports were detailed. Names were given. Measurements recorded. Witnesses signed statements. Then came the silence. Almost every one of these stories ends the same way. An unnamed institution steps in. The bones are collected. Sometimes by government agents, sometimes by men claiming to be from a museum or university. But the remains are never displayed. No photos released, no follow-up reports. Only quiet denials and the slow fading of memory. The locals are left with only the stories, and the growing sense that something was taken from them. Some researchers believe these skeletons were taken to protect a carefully guarded timeline, because if giant human-like beings once roamed the earth, then much of what we are taught about history would collapse. Evolution, anthropology, religion, all of it would need to be rewritten, and the institutions that control knowledge do not like rewriting. Whispers have pointed to the Smithsonian Institution in particular. There are claims, denied of course, that the Smithsonian once held hundreds of giant skeletons in its private archives. Bones that were never shown to the public. Some even say they were destroyed, not because they were dangerous in themselves, but because of what they proved. But the Vatican's name appears just as often in these stories, especially in Europe. When ancient burial sites were uncovered near old churches or beneath cathedrals, strange remains were sometimes found. Oversized skulls, bones with odd proportions. And just like in the Americas, these discoveries were quickly collected and sealed away. No public display, no scientific paper, just another missing piece of a forgotten puzzle. What is most disturbing is not that these bones were found, it is that they were never studied, never shared, never given a place in the story of humanity. Because if they had been, people would have started asking questions. Who were these beings? Where did they come from? And why do so many ancient texts speak of giants as if they were real? Maybe the bones told the truth. Maybe the silence was the answer. When something does not fit the official story, it is not debated, it is erased. And sometimes, the biggest proof of all is not in what you are shown, but in what you are never allowed to see. The Tower of Babel is often taught as a simple tale. People became proud. They tried to build a tower to reach heaven. God scattered their languages so they could no longer work together. A story about human arrogance and divine punishment. But if you look closer, something deeper hides in the cracks. Something far older, something tied to the forbidden legacy of the Nephilim. After the flood, the world was supposed to be new, clean. The giants were gone, the watchers were buried. But ancient pride does not die easily. It hides in bloodlines, in memory, in the whispered ambitions of those who still remember the power that once ruled the earth. And in the shadow of that forgotten past, the Tower of Babel rose. The Book of Genesis says the whole earth had one language. The people gathered in the land of Shinar and said, "Let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven." But why? Why reach for heaven? Why not build homes, farms, temples? Why a tower to the sky? Unless they were trying to return to something they had once known, unless they were trying to force open a gate that had been sealed. Some believe that those who led the building of Babel were not just regular men, that they carried the blood of the Nephilim, survivors of the flood, children of hybrid bloodlines, taught by the Watchers, driven by memories of the world before the reset. And the tower was not just about height, it was about access, reclaiming what had been lost. Ancient traditions say the tower was a ziggurat, a type of step pyramid used in Mesopotamia, aligned to the stars, built with knowledge far beyond what was expected for the time. Like the pyramids of Egypt and the temples of the Maya, it carried the fingerprints of something strange, something ancient, forbidden knowledge disguised as architecture. God's reaction was swift and violent, not just a punishment, a shutdown. He did not just stop the tower, he scrambled human language. He shattered unity. He ended the project with force. That level of intervention only makes sense if something dangerous was unfolding. If Babel was not just a construction site, but an attempt to bypass divine law, to bridge earth and heaven by artificial means. Some even believe the tower was not just symbolic, that it was a kind of technology, a portal, a communication device, a stairway back to the realm of the Watchers, a way to challenge the limits set after the flood. and that possibility could not be allowed. The Vatican knows the deeper layers of this story. In its archives are texts from early Christian mystics who believed the Tower of Babel was built with knowledge passed down from fallen angels, knowledge that should have been erased, but survived in secret. In scattering the languages, God did more than confuse people. He created barriers to slow down humanity's reach, to prevent another fall. Because the Tower of Babel was not just made of brick and tar. It was built on memory, on blood, on the legacy of giants who once believed they could reach heaven by force, and almost did. In the dusty corners of ancient texts and forgotten church records, there are saints who do not fit the mold. Saints who are not remembered for quiet prayer or simple miracles, but for their size, their strength, and their presence that seemed to shake the ground beneath them. Some were described as towering over others. Their hands could crush weapons, their voices could silence crowds, and their enemies often fled at the sight of them. These were not just holy men. They were something else, something older, something redacted. Across medieval Europe, stories began to circulate about saints who seemed more like warriors or gods than simple followers of Christ. Saint Christopher, for example, was said to be so tall that he once carried a child across a river and nearly drowned because the child grew heavier with each step. Later, legends claimed the child was Christ himself. But earlier stories hint at something more. In some versions, Saint Christopher is described as having the face of a dog, a detail that was later removed or rewritten. Others say he belonged to a race of giants. Then there is Saint Gildas, who was said to live long past a normal human lifespan. Saint Olaf of Norway was remembered as a man who could wield a sword too heavy for others to lift. And the Irish tales of Saint Finbar describe a glow around him that made others fall to their knees. These are not the traits of ordinary men. These are echoes of something deeper. In many of these stories, there is a strange pattern. Their parentage is vague. Their childhoods are brief. They arrive in the narrative already formed, powerful, enlightened. Some even show up without clear birth records at all, as if they simply appeared. This is where the questions begin. Were these saints descended from ancient bloodlines? Could they have carried within them the last traces of the Nephilim? If the blood of giants survived the flood, it would not have remained in the open. It would have gone underground, hidden behind titles, behind robes, behind holiness. A bloodline protected not by violence but by worship. And the church, which once burned heretics for far less, may have decided to hide the truth behind sainthood, to turn bloodlines into legends, to reframe power as divine favour. Some of the oldest cathedrals in Europe were built over ancient ruins. Pagan temples, giant graves, sacred sites that predated Christianity by thousands of years. The church did not destroy these places. It absorbed them, sanctified them, and perhaps in doing so, it also absorbed the bloodlines connected to them. If certain saints were descendants of Nephilim, their powers would have been seen as both a threat and an opportunity. Rather than expose them, the church may have canonized them, giving the people someone to worship and giving the bloodline a way to survive. The Vatican has never commented on these stories. The records of the early saints are heavily edited. Pages are missing, accounts rewritten, but the legends remain, and they point to a time when holiness and bloodlines were one and the same, a time when giants wore robes, and the line between man and myth was carefully hidden behind stained glass and silence. Long before the church became the towering institution it is today, early Christians read from a wide range of texts. Some were familiar, others were strange and filled with stories of angels, giants, and cosmic battles. One of the most respected books among them was the Book of Enoch. It was quoted by church fathers. It was referenced in the Epistle of Jude, and it told the story of the Watchers, the Nephilim, and the true cause of the flood. But somewhere between the early days of faith and the rise of organized religion, something changed. The Book of Enoch was banned, labeled apocryphal, and quietly buried. The question is why? What made the early councils so afraid of these texts? The answer lies not in what the Book of Enoch got wrong, but in what it revealed too clearly. It described a world where angels came to earth, not as messengers, but as rebels. They shared forbidden knowledge. They created giants. They altered humanity. This was not just myth. It was a dangerous mirror to the early church's growing power. In the 4th century, during the councils of Laodicea and later at Carthage, church leaders began to draw strict lines around what was considered Holy Scripture. The goal was order, unity, control, and that meant any book that raised difficult questions had to go. The Book of Enoch was removed, along with others that did not fit the official story. Not because they were lies, but because they told too much of the truth. Enoch spoke of angels being judged, of ancient rulers who were not human, of a flood meant to erase a hybrid race. These ideas shook the foundation of a clean and simple theology. The church needed a sharp divide between good and evil, heaven and earth, divine and fallen. The Book of Enoch blurred those lines. It showed that even heavenly beings could fall in ways not found in the story of Lucifer. It revealed that the corruption of humanity came not just from sin, but from divine interference. By branding these truths as heresy, the church took control of the narrative. It told the faithful what to believe and what to forget, and for centuries it worked. The banned books disappeared from Europe. Only in Ethiopia did the Book of Enoch survive, hidden within the ancient Orthodox tradition. When Western scholars finally rediscovered it in the 19th century, they were stunned. It filled in the missing pieces of Genesis. It explained the flood. It revealed the names of the Watchers. And it showed that early Christians knew far more than we were ever told. But even now, the church does not speak of it. It stays silent because acknowledging these texts would unravel a history built on half-truths. It would force a re-examination of what really happened before the flood, who the Nephilim were, and how far their bloodlines reached. The church did not ban Enoch because it was false. It banned it because it was a key to a locked door they never wanted opened again, and that door, once opened, might reveal a version of history the world was never meant to see. Walk through the great cathedrals of Europe and you will feel it. A sense that you are small, that the walls around you stretch too high, that the doors are not just tall, but impossibly tall. You look up at the arches and the ceilings and wonder why they were built with such overwhelming scale. Was it all just symbolism? A way to make people feel the power of heaven? Or was there something else? Something hidden in plain sight? Look at the entrances of Notre Dame in Paris, or the towering gates of Cologne Cathedral in Germany. These are not just decorative doors. They are massive. Some are over 30 feet tall. And they are not alone. In dozens of ancient churches, you will find thrones too large to sit in, stairways with risers too high for a normal stride, and pulpits that can only be reached by climbing steps more suited for someone twice our size. Architects explain this by saying it was meant to reflect grandeur. But what if these buildings were not just symbolic? What if they were functional? What if they were built for beings larger than us? The earliest cathedrals were often constructed on top of older sites, pagan temples, pre-Christian shrines. Some of these sites were chosen not just for spiritual reasons, but because of what had been found there: bones, carvings, tombs, and in rare cases, ruins that suggested someone had once built on a much larger scale. Rather than destroy these remnants, the church built over them, and perhaps, in doing so, preserved the proportions of whoever had come before. Throughout the Middle Ages, stories of giants filled the folklore of Europe, but some of those stories were not just told by peasants. They were etched into the stone of the very buildings the church called sacred. Hidden in the columns and archways of cathedrals are carvings of tall, robed figures towering over humans. Some have elongated skulls, some carry strange staffs or orbs, and in certain cases, these figures are shown walking through doors that match the oversized entrances we still see today. Art historians call this symbolism, a way to depict the divine, but the pattern is too consistent, too detailed. It appears not just in one region, but across the continent, in France, in Spain, in Italy, in the British Isles. Giant proportions woven into sacred architecture, and always in the oldest parts of the church. There are also legends that the builders of these cathedrals had help, that masons were taught by mysterious men who came from distant lands and carried scrolls of ancient knowledge. The Templars were one such group, accused of preserving secrets from the time before the flood. Perhaps they knew the true purpose behind the scale of these buildings. Perhaps they knew who they were really honouring. If the Nephilim did survive in bloodline or spirit, it makes sense that they would have left behind temples made in their image. Not just tombs, but monuments, hidden in the open, waiting to be recognised. The question is no longer whether these structures are oversized. The question is who they were truly built for, and whether their original occupants might one day return to walk through those towering doors once again. Long before Columbus ever set foot on American soil, stories of giants echoed across the valleys, plains, and mountains of the New World. Native tribes from coast to coast spoke of beings who were not just tall, but terrifying. Red-haired giants with pale skin, massive strength, and a hunger for war. These stories were not myths whispered to children. They were warnings, memories passed down for generations, and strangely, they sound almost identical to the stories told thousands of years earlier in the Middle East about the Nephilim. The Paiute people of Nevada tell of a fierce race of red-haired cannibal giants called the Site-Ka. According to tribal elders, the Site-Ka were already present when their ancestors arrived. They were massive, aggressive, and lived in caves. After years of conflict, the tribes united and forced the giants into a final standoff, burning them alive inside a cave. That cave, now known as Lovelock Cave, would later be excavated by archaeologists in the early 20th century. There, they found strange artifacts, oversized sandals, ancient tools, and most controversial of all, giant bones and red human hair. The story does not end there. Tribes like the Choctaw, the Comanche, and the Manta all spoke of giants who once ruled parts of America. Some said they could outrun buffalo. Others claimed they ripped trees from the ground with their bare hands. Many of these giants were said to be hostile, almost godlike in strength, but lacking mercy or morality. Their downfall was always violent. A war, a flood, a rebellion. The same pattern seen in the story of the Nephilim. What makes these accounts so strange is how far they spread. From South America to Canada, the legends remain consistent. Massive beings with strange features, often described as red-haired or light-skinned. This matches certain Middle Eastern descriptions of the Nephilim, who were said to be different in appearance from the local populations. Some ancient Jewish texts describe them as shining, glowing, or even possessing fiery hair. Could it be that these were not isolated events, but a global presence. If the Nephilim truly walked the earth, then why would they stay in one place? After the flood, if even one survived, what would stop them or their descendants from travelling? Ancient seafaring may have been far more advanced than we think. Maps like the Piri Race show coastlines with stunning accuracy centuries before modern navigation. Megalithic structures in Peru and Bolivia resemble those in the Middle East. Were these places once visited by the same beings? Some believe the Vatican has records of early Jesuit missionaries encountering strange ruins and giant skeletons in the Americas. These reports, like so many others, were never made public. Instead, they were quietly sent back to Rome, where they vanished into the archives. If the stories from both sides of the world match so perfectly, then we have to ask the question no historian wants to face. Did giants once rule not just the old world, but the new world too? And if they did, how much of our global past has been carefully edited to hide a chapter too large to ignore? When the Jesuit missionaries arrived in the Americas during the 16th and 17th centuries, they came with more than just Bibles. They brought ink, parchment, measuring tools, and a deep curiosity about the strange lands they were entering. While their official mission was to convert the native peoples to Christianity, many of them acted as historians, linguists, and explorers. They kept detailed journals, collected artifacts, and documented every unusual thing they found. And among those discoveries were bones. Not just any bones, but giant bones. From the jungles of South America to the plains of North America, the Jesuits began reporting strange encounters. Some tribes told them of ancient beings who once ruled the land. Others showed them burial mounds containing skeletons far larger than any man. The missionaries, trained to observe and report, wrote it all down. They sent letters back to Rome, sometimes with drawings, sometimes with fragments. And then, silence. The reports were received, the bones were shipped, but once they reached the Vatican, they vanished. This pattern became all too common. A missionary writes of an 11-foot skeleton found in a cave. Another describes a burial site filled with skulls 3 times the size of a normal human head. These accounts, once part of official Jesuit correspondence, began to disappear from public view. Some were redacted, others were destroyed. The missionaries themselves were often reassigned or silenced. What began as honest curiosity turned into quiet erasure. Why would the Jesuits do this? Some say it was not their decision, that the evidence they collected was considered too dangerous by higher authorities within the church. The presence of giants, especially ones that matched the description of the Nephilim, would force the church to explain a version of history far outside the biblical narrative it wanted to protect. And so, the choice was made. The giants had to be erased. But not completely. Some Jesuits hid their findings in coded manuscripts. Others passed their knowledge down to secret groups within the church. Whispers of this hidden knowledge survived. Hints appear in rare books, private letters, even in old maps that mark locations now lost to time. There is also evidence that some of these bones were stored in underground vaults beneath monasteries in Europe, kept far from public eyes, but never destroyed. It is believed that some Jesuit scholars began to question their role. They saw that what they were documenting was not legend, but suppressed truth. Some became obsessed, spending their lives searching for more evidence. Others broke away entirely, refusing to play a part in the silence. But their voices were few, and the power of the church was vast. The Vatican has never acknowledged these claims. The official line remains unchanged. There were no giants. The stories are symbolic. The bones were misidentified, but the trail left behind by the Jesuits says otherwise. If you follow the letters, the maps, and the rumors, a clear picture emerges. The giants were real. They were found, and the church made sure they were forgotten, not because they were myth, but because they were the one truth too large to be allowed into the light. For thousands of years, kings and popes have ruled not just by power but by blood. Their thrones were not taken, they were inherited, passed down like relics through generations with one goal in mind: to keep the line pure. But what did that really mean? Was it about politics, family loyalty, or something far older, something hidden beneath the robes and crowns? A secret obsession with preserving a bloodline that may not have been entirely human. The idea of divine right was not just a religious claim, it was a blood claim. That rulers were chosen by God because their blood made them different, special, holy. This belief appeared in Europe, in the Middle East, and even in parts of Asia. Pharaohs claimed descent from the gods. European monarchs traced their lines back to biblical figures. Popes were selected through secretive rituals that, for centuries, required proof of noble or even mysterious ancestry. It was not about who was the most moral, it was about who had the right blood. In ancient Sumer, kings were said to have received their authority from the Anunnaki, sky gods who descended to earth. These gods were believed to have altered human beings, creating rulers who were part divine. In Egypt, the god kings were believed to be born of the gods and mortal women, a pattern that mirrors the story of the Nephilim, sons of God and daughters of men. And in the Bible, after the flood, the descendants of Noah suddenly start showing signs of extraordinary power, wisdom, and longevity, as if something in the blood had survived. Throughout medieval Europe, noble families were obsessed with lineage. Marriages were arranged not for love, but to protect bloodlines. Cousins married cousins. Alliances were forged through shared ancestry. Some royal families even claimed descent from the giant Gog and Magog, and others kept secret genealogies connecting them to biblical figures, believing that this ancient blood gave them the right to rule. But what if the blood they guarded was not just royal? What if it was hybrid? Some researchers believe that certain families carried remnants of the Nephilim line, not enough to be giants, but enough to stand out: heightened intelligence, unusual appearance, charisma that bordered on supernatural. And these traits were preserved through careful breeding, hidden behind symbols of holiness and leadership. The Church, too, may have played a role. By choosing popes from noble bloodlines and performing secret rituals during selection, they ensured the continuation of something ancient. There are even whispers that certain initiation rites performed in hidden parts of the Vatican involved blood testing, not for disease, but for lineage, to confirm something carried quietly through generations. A genetic fingerprint of a forgotten race, one that once ruled by size and strength, and later by knowledge and faith. This idea challenges everything we have been told about power, that it is earned, voted, appointed. What if it was never about those things? What if the real rulers of the world were chosen because of what they carried in their veins? A trace of the Nephilim, a spark of something not entirely human. And what if they still walk among us, wearing crowns, wearing robes, and still protecting the bloodline that was never meant to survive the flood? In the flickering shadows of candle-lit chambers and behind locked wooden doors, secret societies have gathered for centuries. They speak in symbols. They wear robes marked with stars and compasses. They build temples in silence and meet under the moon. Some say their rituals are harmless. Others say they are keepers of something far older than we understand. The Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, the Templars. What if their true purpose was never just philosophy or charity? What if they were guarding the last fragments of forbidden knowledge, the legacy of the Nephilim? Look at the symbols carved into Masonic halls. The all-seeing eye, the square and compass, the twin pillars named Boaz and Jachin. These are not random, they are ancient. The pillars mirror those said to have stood at the entrance of Solomon's temple, a temple that, according to legend, was built with help from beings not entirely human. Some stories say Solomon commanded spirits. Others whisper that he had access to technology gifted by the Watchers, knowledge that the Freemasons now protect through metaphor and ritual. The Rosicrucians speak of hidden wisdom passed down through the ages, knowledge that predates even ancient Egypt. They believe in a perfect truth that was buried to keep it safe. Their writings speak of light, stars, transformation, but behind the poetry is a deeper code, one that traces back to the Book of Enoch, to the fallen angels, to the Nephilim who once walked the earth. These societies do not just study history, they preserve it. They pass it down secretly because the world is not ready for what it reveals. Throughout history, those who got too close to this truth were silenced, burned as heretics, cast out as madmen. But within the lodges and temples of these secret orders, the stories survived. Not in full, but in symbols. The giants became allegory, the Watchers became guiding lights, the flood became a metaphor for reset, and behind every ritual, a message was whispered. Remember, some believe the layout of Washington, D.C. was influenced by Masonic symbolism, that the Capitol and the monuments form geometric patterns meant to mirror ancient star maps. Others say the cathedrals of Europe contain hidden messages encoded in their architecture, clues left behind by builders who knew the truth but dared not speak it openly. Builders who were part of a brotherhood older than any kingdom. The Church always feared these groups, not because they were evil, but because they remembered. The Vatican condemned the Templars. It watched the rise of Freemasonry with suspicion. It tried to absorb or erase anything that hinted at an older truth. But secrets this powerful do not vanish. They go underground. They wait. And now, in the age of information, some of those secrets are surfacing again, not through official channels, but through symbols, through whispers, through patterns hiding in plain sight. The Nephilim are not just a chapter in a banned book. They are the foundation of a hidden faith, one kept alive by those who know that giants once ruled the earth and might yet return. High in the mountains of Arizona stands a strange building with a dome that opens to the stars. It belongs not to a university or a private science group, but to the Vatican. It is called the Vatican Observatory, one of the oldest astronomical research institutions in the world, a place where priests and scientists study the skies side by side. The question is, why? Why does the Church need to watch the stars? And what exactly are they looking for? Officially, the Vatican says it studies astronomy to better understand creation, that science and faith are not enemies, but allies, that by observing the cosmos, they can get closer to the mind of God. But some believe there is another reason, one that has nothing to do with planets or stars, one that goes back to the days before the flood, to the time of the Watchers. The Book of Enoch says the Watchers descended from the heavens to Mount Hermon. They came from the sky. They taught forbidden knowledge. They altered humanity, and they were punished, bound beneath the earth. Their children, the Nephilim, were wiped out in the flood. But the book hints at something chilling, that one day the Watchers will return, that their imprisonment is not eternal, that there is a clock ticking in the heavens. Could the Vatican be tracking that clock? Ancient cultures believed the sky was more than just stars. It was a map, a calendar, a warning system. The Mayans, Egyptians, and Sumerians all looked to the heavens to predict divine events. They believed the return of gods or giants would be marked by specific signs in the sky. eclipses, comets, planetary alignments. Are we seeing the same thing now? Some researchers point to the Vatican's unusual interest in infrared astronomy. Their observatory on Mount Graham houses a powerful instrument known as Lucifer. It stands for Large Binocular Telescope Near Infrared Utility with Camera and Integral Field Unit for Extragalactic Research. A strange choice of name for a church telescope, unless it means something else. In Latin, Lucifer means light bringer, the same title once given to the fallen ones. What if the Vatican is not just studying light, but watching for a return, a re-entry, a sign that the beings cast down long ago are coming back? Revelation speaks of stars falling to earth, of the abyss being opened, of giants rising again. It sounds like myth until you see the church building observatories in remote mountains, staffing them with priests trained in both scripture and science. Then it begins to feel like preparation. If the Nephilim came from the stars, their return would not come through politics or war. It would come through the sky, a slow approach, a celestial alignment, a signal only those who watch closely would see. And the Vatican has been watching longer than most. The truth may be too large to hide forever. One day, something may appear in the heavens, and when it does, the church might already know what it is, because they have seen it before, buried in ancient texts, etched into forgotten stone, and reflected in the cold glass of a telescope pointed at the stars, waiting, watching, preparing. In the final pages of the Bible, in the Book of Revelation, there are warnings of a time when the earth will be shaken, when strange beings rise, when the sky splits open, and when ancient powers return. For most people, these prophecies are seen as symbolic, metaphors for war, famine, or moral decay. But one line stands out like a key hidden in plain sight. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. But what were the days of Noah really like? Genesis chapter 6 tells us plainly. In those days, the sons of God came down and took human wives. Their offspring were giants, the Nephilim, beings of enormous strength and unnatural knowledge. It was because of them, according to some texts, that the world became corrupt, and so came the flood, a divine reset. But if Jesus himself warned that the end would be like those days, then what does that mean for us now? Modern interest in giants is more than curiosity. It is a signal. For centuries, stories of giants were dismissed as myth. But now, old bones are being rediscovered. Ancient texts are being translated. People are beginning to ask dangerous questions. Why do so many cultures speak of a race of giants who once ruled the earth? Why are these stories so consistent? And why are they returning now? Some believe we are entering the final age, that the rise in knowledge, the unlocking of genetics, and the exploration of ancient ruins are all pieces of the prophecy. That we are once again becoming like the people before the flood, arrogant, bound to forbidden knowledge, mixing things that were never meant to be mixed. And at the edge of this rising tide stands a shadow from the past, the Nephilim. What if they never truly disappeared? What if their bloodlines remained hidden, waiting? What if the reason for the flood was not just about sin, but about containment, a way to delay their return? And what if that delay is now ending? The Book of Revelation speaks of beasts rising from the sea, of locusts with the faces of men, of giants bound beneath the river Euphrates being released. These are not images of normal war. They are echoes, visions of a world returning to its ancient state, a time when man walked beside beings not of this earth, and it all begins again when the door opens. The church has remained quiet on these connections. Revelation is preached as a mystery, not a warning. but the clues are there, as it was in the days of Noah. Not just a time of violence, but a time of giants, of fallen angels, of genetic corruption. That is the true warning. And we are already beginning to see the signs in the rise of old bones, in the return of forbidden knowledge, in the secrets no longer staying buried. The giants are not just part of the past, they may be part of the future. And when they return, it will not be quietly, it will mark the beginning of the end, just like it did once before, in the days of Noah. Across the world, people are waking up with dreams they cannot explain, feelings they have never felt before, a pull toward ancient knowledge, toward symbols and languages they have never studied. Some feel drawn to the stars, others to forgotten ruins, as if something inside them remembers, as if their blood holds a story older than their minds can grasp. Could this be more than imagination? Could this be genetic memory, a spark from an ancient lineage beginning to stir? Science tells us that our DNA carries more than physical traits. It holds memories, patterns, behaviors passed down through generations. Some researchers believe trauma and experience can be encoded in our genes. If that is true, then what happens when a bloodline carries more than just human memories? What happens when that bloodline is touched by something older? Something from before the flood? Something Nephilim? The idea is not as far-fetched as it sounds. In recent years, scientists have discovered what they call junk DNA, strands that seem to have no purpose. They lie dormant, silent. But what if they are not junk? What if they are locked, waiting for the right conditions to activate, waiting for the world to reach a certain frequency, a certain time, a certain alignment? And when that moment comes, the memories inside begin to awaken. Ancient texts speak of hidden wisdom, knowledge that cannot be learned from books, only remembered, passed down through the blood. The Book of Enoch says the Watchers taught their children secrets of the stars, the earth, and the human body. The Nephilim inherited that knowledge, and if their bloodline survived, so did the memory, trapped in the cells, waiting. There are people today who experience spontaneous knowledge. They suddenly understand symbols they have never seen before. They speak in languages they have never studied. They draw star maps from memory. They feel a connection to places they have never visited. Scientists call it anomaly, but others see it as a sign that the Nephilim blood is stirring. Some believe that events in the world are triggering this awakening. Changes in magnetic fields, shifts in cosmic energy, ancient tombs being opened, forbidden books being read again. All of these may be unlocking something hidden in our very structure, and those with Nephilim blood may feel it first. It is said that the Nephilim were not just giants in body, but in mind, that they possessed gifts of perception, language, healing, and control over nature. If any of that remains, even in trace amounts, then awakening that DNA could mean the return of abilities we thought were myth, not magic. Memory. The Church has no official stance on genetic memory, but their silence speaks volumes. Because if it is real, then everything changes. The past is not just behind us, it is inside us. And those with ancient blood may soon remember who they truly are, not through dreams, but through awakening, through blood calling to blood, through the echo of giants rising once more, not from the ground, but from within. In the early pages of Genesis, there is a man who vanishes from history without warning. His name is Enoch. He walks with God, we are told, and then he is gone, taken, not buried, not mourned, just taken, as if his body was never meant to stay here, as if what he knew made him too dangerous to remain among men. For centuries, this moment has puzzled readers. Why would God take a man instead of letting him die? What secret did Enoch carry that no one else could be trusted with? To understand Enoch's disappearance, we have to look beyond Genesis. In the Book of Enoch, the truth begins to unfold. Enoch is not just a holy man. He is a scribe, a witness, a messenger between heaven and earth. He is chosen to record the actions of the watchers, the angels who descend and break the divine laws. He sees what they teach. He sees what they create. And he sees what becomes of their children, the Nephilim. Enoch does not just observe, he documents, and that makes him a threat. Enoch writes of forbidden knowledge, secrets of the stars, the movements of the moon, the names of angels, and the powers of the heavens. He is shown how time works, how the earth is shaped, how judgment will come. In short, he sees the full picture. He knows the beginning and the end. And perhaps, most importantly, he sees what is coming after the flood. The bloodlines that will survive, the knowledge that will be hidden, and the cycle that will repeat. When Enoch is taken, it is not an act of mercy, it is an extraction. He is pulled out of the timeline because what he carries cannot be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. His scrolls, his visions, his understanding of the Watchers and their technology would reshape the future if revealed too soon. So he is removed, elevated, hidden. Some ancient texts say Enoch was transformed into the angel Metatron, a being of immense power who now stands at the throne of God as a recorder of all things. If this is true, it means Enoch was never meant to simply live and die. He was part of a design far bigger than human life, a bridge between worlds, a guardian of knowledge. There is another theory, that Enoch was taken not just to preserve knowledge, but to survive a judgment. The flood was coming, the earth was about to be cleansed. And Enoch, unlike Noah, could not be part of the survival below. He had to be removed before the reset, placed beyond reach, in a realm where memory could not be erased. The Church rarely speaks of Enoch's disappearance. His book was banned, his name forgotten in sermons. But the mystery remains, a man who did not die, a man who knew too much, and perhaps, one day, a man who will return, with the scrolls, with the truth, with the forbidden story of the giants and the Watchers, not as legend, but as a witness to the first age and a warning for the last. For an institution that has spoken with authority on almost every topic under the sun, the Vatican's silence on giants is deafening. No official stance, no detailed commentary on Genesis chapter 6, no mention of the Nephilim in Catechism. And when it comes to the Book of Enoch, one of the most referenced texts among early Christians, the Church simply ignores it, shelves it, bans it, pretends it never existed. But that silence is not an accident. It is strategic. And maybe it is the loudest proof of all. Genesis 6 verse 4 is not just a line in a long story. It is a fracture, a crack in the narrative. It speaks of sons of God, daughters of men, and giants roaming the earth. It sits awkwardly between creation and the flood, as if slipped in by a scribe who knew it was too important to leave out. Yet from pulpits to seminaries, that verse is skimmed over, cleaned up with metaphors, dismissed as myth. The question is why? Why not explain it? Why not confront it? The answer may lie in what that verse implies. If the Nephilim were real, then so were the sons of God who came down. That means angelic beings interfered with humanity, that ancient civilizations were not just built by human hands, that the world before the flood was a place of hybrid bloodlines, forbidden technology, and heavenly rebellion. That version of history does not fit the clean, simple timeline the Church has spent centuries defending. The Book of Enoch makes it worse. It names the angels, describes their sins, details the secrets they gave humanity. It talks about the giants, the flood, the punishment, and it places Enoch at the center of it all, taken by God not because of faith alone, but because he saw too much. This book was once beloved by early Christians, quoted in the New Testament, preserved in Ethiopia. But it was removed from the canon, not because it was false, but because it revealed too much. And still, the Vatican says nothing. No retraction, no debate, just silence. Even when ancient bones are discovered that do not match human proportions, even when tribal stories from around the world echo the tales of Genesis, even when modern science begins to explore the idea of hybrid DNA and genetic memory, the Church remains quiet, watching, waiting, saying nothing. Some believe the silence is a form of control, that speaking of giants would unlock too many doors, lead to too many questions. Others think it is fear, that the Church knows the truth and is terrified of what it means, that the Nephilim bloodlines never ended, that some still walk the earth, that ancient knowledge is resurfacing, and that prophecy is not about the past, but about what is coming next. In the end, silence speaks volumes. It creates a space for suspicion, for doubt, for curiosity. And maybe that is why people are starting to listen again, not to the words the Church says, but to the ones it refuses to say. The loudest truth is often the one that no one dares to speak. And in that silence, the story of the Nephilim continues to grow, waiting to be uncovered, waiting to be heard. Every ancient culture has a story, a warning, a tale whispered through generations about a time when giants walked the earth, when gods rebelled, and when a flood swallowed the world. These stories come from tribes that never met, from continents divided by oceans and language. Yet the details are so alike, it is as if they were all remembering the same event, the same truth, a memory too large and too terrifying to die. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a hero, part divine, part human, who seeks immortality. His journey reveals a global flood sent by the gods to wipe out a corrupt world. A man named Utnapishtim builds a great boat, survives the flood, and preserves life. Sound familiar? It mirrors the story of Noah almost exactly, but it was written hundreds of years earlier. In India, the story of Manu follows a similar path. A great flood, a chosen man, a floating ark. The gods intervene, but the world must be cleansed. Across the ocean, the Mayans speak of past worlds destroyed by water and fire. The Aztecs believed in previous suns or ages, each ending in destruction because of divine rebellion or human corruption. In Africa, stories tell of great beings who fell from the sky and taught mankind things they should not know. In the Pacific Islands, legends speak of tall, white-skinned giants who once ruled the land and were later destroyed by a great flood from the heavens. Native American tribes remember red-haired giants who warred with their ancestors. Some were said to be cannibals, others lived in caves, some taught strange knowledge. All were wiped out in a great cleansing. And in the Norse tradition, there were the Jotnar, ancient giants locked in conflict with the gods. Their battles caused storms, earthquakes, and eventually Ragnarok, the end of days. These stories are not separated by chance. They are echoes, memory trapped in myth. Cultures may shape details to fit their beliefs, but the pattern remains the same. A heavenly rebellion, the mixing of divine and human, the rise of giants, a flood, a reset, a warning. Even the stars hold the same signs. Ancient zodiacs align with flood narratives. Star maps from Babylon to China speak of watchers, guardians, and beings who fell from the heavens. How could so many civilizations across space and time share the same structure of myth unless it was more than myth, unless it was a memory? The church may call it allegory. Historians may call it coincidence. But when the stories repeat with such clarity, such weight, they begin to speak louder than facts. They point to a shared trauma, a global event, a secret passed down in symbols, stories, and silence. What we call mythology may be the survival of human memory. What we call legend may be the last pieces of forbidden truth. And when they are all placed side by side, they no longer look like fantasy. They look like history, one that was buried, erased, but never forgotten. Because the earth remembers, and so do we. What if they never left? What if the giants of old, the Nephilim born of fallen angels and human blood, did not vanish in the flood as we were told? What if the story of their destruction was only a half-truth? What if some survived, hidden, changed, blending into human bloodlines so carefully that their presence became legend, then myth, then forgotten altogether? But forgotten does not mean gone. All around us are traces, symbols carved into ancient stone, oversized thrones in forgotten halls, cathedrals with doors tall enough to welcome beings 3 times the height of man, skulls with double rows of teeth locked away in dusty museum basements, royal bloodlines obsessed with purity, secret societies guarding rituals they claim come from the stars, whispers in holy texts and forbidden scrolls. What are they trying to hide? Or perhaps who? Some say the Nephilim learned to adapt, that they scattered after the flood, went underground, and re-emerged in forms we would never suspect. Not always as giants in size, but in influence, in intellect, in charisma, that over time their children forgot what they were, or chose to forget. But deep in the bones, something ancient still hums, waiting, watching. Could the elite carry their blood? Could rulers, popes, scientists, and icons of culture be descended from the same line that once shook the earth before the rain fell? Could their dreams be haunted by a world they never saw but somehow remember? The memory of stone cities crushed by water, the sky darkening, the watchers falling, the voices of their fathers calling from beyond the stars. And what of the Vatican? Why collect books that speak of giants? Why guard vaults filled with bones? Why fund observatories in mountains and name their lenses after the Lightbringer? Maybe they know. Maybe they have always known. Maybe their silence is not denial. It is fear or obedience. In every generation there are stories. Children born with strange gifts. People who speak languages they never studied. Visions that feel more like memories. A connection to the stars that science cannot explain. These are dismissed as fantasy, coincidence. But what if they are the beginning of something, an awakening? The Book of Revelation speaks of a time when the earth will shake and ancient things will rise. It warns of beasts and kings and false prophets. But what if the beasts are not monsters? What if they are bloodlines? Walking quietly through the world, hiding behind names and titles and smiles, waiting for the right moment to remember who they are. Not everything buried stays buried. Not every myth is fiction. Sometimes truth wears a mask so old we forget it ever had a face. But now the pieces are being uncovered. The patterns are returning. And the question remains, what if the Nephilim are not gone? What if they are still here, watching us, studying us, preparing? And what if one day soon they stop waiting?